Good morning, everybody. Today is the second day that we are reviewing trigonometric graphs. Okay, so these are the same questions that we did yesterday. They are just different types of numbers and questions. So the first question is asking what is the amplitude, what is the frequency, and what is the period. So the amplitude is your height of your function, and it's always the first number that you see in the equation. So in this case, the amplitude is 3. Your frequency is always the number that comes after the sine or cosine, but it doesn't include the variable. And your frequency represents how many curves you see to 2 pi. So in this case, your frequency is 2. Now your period has a formula. Your period is 2 pi over b. And b is really the same thing as your frequency. So 2 pi over b in this case is 2. And if you can simplify it, you will. Therefore, 2 divided by 2 simplifies, and your period is equal to pi. All right, question 2. Which trigonometric function is shown in the graph below? So we have 4 options here. I noticed that options 1, 2, 3 are all sine, and I noticed that option 4 is cosine. So one of the first things that I notice is that this starts at your center line, okay? That's called your midline. I call it the belly button because it's the center. So sine curves start at the center, so therefore choice 4 has to be out. The second thing that I'm kind of interested in is to see what is the amplitude. Your amplitude is how high and how low you go from the center. So what I notice is that we're going up to 2 and we're going down to 2. Therefore, our amplitude has to be 2. So if you look at choices 1 and 2, there's no number, which indicates that the amplitude is 1, but if you look at choice 3, the amplitude is 2. Therefore, by process of elimination, it has to be choice 3. And I just want to make note that this 2 represents your frequency, which just means that I see 2 curves to 2 pi. So just to kind of show you the 2 curves, this green represents one curve, and this yellow represents the second curve. Okay, number 3. What is the amplitude of the function shown in the accompanying graph? So what you'll notice here is that there's a shift. This curve, we're not sure if it's sine or cosine, but this entire curve was shifted below the axis. So we need to find the new center of the curve. So we really need to figure out, okay, how high and how low is this graph going? And let's create the center. So I noticed that the highest it goes is -1. And I noticed that the lowest it goes is -5. So if you think about it, that's 4 total boxes. So if I have 4 spaces, can I create a line directly in the middle? The answer is yes. I would put this line right there, okay? So that your center line or your midline is at -3. Now that I know where my center is, okay, I can find my amplitude. My amplitude is how high and how low I go from the center. So if I'm at -3, I'm going up to -1, and I'm going down to -5. So how many spaces is that? What is the amplitude for this question? I'm going 2 spaces up, 2 spaces down. Therefore, my amplitude is 2. All right. Number 4. What is the maximum value of y for the equation? So this question also has a shift. This entire cosine function was moved up 5 spaces. So originally it used to go up 2, down 2, but because it was shifted up 5, it's going up 2, down 2 from 5. So the highest it's going to go and the lowest is going to go would be taking your shift and adding and subtracting your amplitude. So that means the highest that this graph will go is 7. The lowest that this graph will go is 3. Now for this question, they're only asking for the max, so it's 7. Okay, moving on. 3 more questions. Given the parent function p of x is equal to cosine x, which phrase best describes the transformation used to obtain the graph g of x is equal to cosine x minus a plus b, if a and b are positive constants? So all we're saying is that we had an original graph, it was just a regular cosine graph, and we shifted it. So there are some rules with shifting, okay? The one that we see most commonly is a number at the end. If this number is positive, it goes up. If this number is negative, it goes down. So because we see a plus b, this is going up b. Now, there's also a number attached to the x. I call this hugging the x. So this minus a is hugging the x. This is a shift left or right, but it's in the opposite direction of the sign. So if you see a plus sign, it's actually going to the left, and if you see a minus sign, it's actually going to the right. Therefore, this shift is to the right A. Therefore, if we look at our 4 options, we're looking for right A and up B, which is choice 1. All right, the last 2 questions are graphing sine and cosine. So in order to graph sine and cosine, we're going to need to know the height, which is our amplitude, and we're going to need to know the length of the curve. So your amplitude is always the first number, and your period has a formula, 2 pi over b, and this number, the second number, is always your b. So 2 pi over 2, and 2 pi over 2 simplifies to pi. So whenever you're graphing a curve, this comes from the unit circle, which had 4 quadrants. So we're always going to go ahead and break this up into 4 quadrants, or 4 parts. And we always want to label the end, okay? So the length of this particular curve is pi. Now the other thing that you don't technically need to label, but you do want to make sure that your amplitude makes sense. So for this one, because the amplitude is 2, you're going up 2, down 2. Okay, so we have a sine curve. So just to give you a little demonstration of the sine curve starts at your center. And it goes up, down, and back. So we're going to start at the center here. And a quarter of the way at the first tick mark, we're going to go up. Then we're going to start heading back down. So halfway, we're going to go back to the center. 3/4 of the way, which is the third tick, we're going to go down to the amplitude. And we're going to finish up right back at that center. So here is my sine curve. Okay? And then the last question is a cosine curve. So the number 3 represents your amplitude. Your period is 2 pi over b. In this case, your b is 1. So 2 pi over 1 is 2 pi. All right, so let's set up the graph. You always set up the graph by breaking it up into 4 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you always want to label the length. So for this question, the length happens to be 2 pi. So your period is always going to be different because it depends on what your equation is. But you're always breaking it up into 4 parts. All right, and I like to just kind of make a little tick mark for my amplitude. So I'm going to make sure that I'm going up 3 and down 3. Okay, so to give you a little review of the cosine curve does not start at the center. It actually starts at the amplitude. And your cosine curve kind of looks like a big U. It kind of dips down and comes back up. So when we want to connect the dots here, we're starting at the amplitude. Our first tick mark, which is a quarter of the way, we're going to start heading down towards the center. Halfway, we're going to go down towards the bottom, which is going to be the amplitude of 3 down. 3/4 of the way, which is your third tick mark, you're going to start heading back up. And you're going to finish all the way back up at your amplitude. And this is your cosine curve. All right, hope that helped everybody. Let me know if you have any questions. Have a great weekend.